Hi everyone, welcome to this video on EDUQAS Paper 1. We're looking at the reading exam in this question. This exam is 1 hour 45. You get an hour for the reading and then you do your short story. If you want to look at the short story video, it's on your Teams page. It's also on YouTube. So like I say, we're looking at the reading exam where you've got to read a page and a half of a fictional story and then answer 5 questions on it. So it's 1 hour, 5 questions, an extract from 1900. I will try 1900 and 1999. Normally it'll be towards the 1999 end, so they won't give you something from 1902. It will be fairly modern. And you have 5 questions. Question 1 is a bullet point question, so quite an easy question. List 5 things. Then we've got an impressions questions, 2 how questions, and then agree with the question at the end. So they will give you a statement, you agree with it, and find 5 or 6 quotes that back it up. Just be aware the impressions question and the how questions do swap. So the impressions question could be worth 10 marks and you would need to do be question 4, for example. The reason I put the last 3 questions in blue is that we're basically going to answer them the same way. So I'll try and make this video as short as possible. However, we are looking at a whole exam, so it might take a while. Okay, really important for this question, only read from the line stated. So if you look up here, yeah, it says read lines 1 to 7. So good exam technique would be, when you get to question 1, you don't spend time reading the whole exam, you just tell you where to, you just say, you just read where the exam tells you to. So for example, question 1, read lines 1 to 7. Question 2, read lines 8 to 23, and so on. So by the end of the exam, you would have read it all, but don't waste time at the end, at the start of the exam, starting and reading the whole thing. Okay, you must time manage, so good exam technique would be look at the clock before starting each question and then figure out, well, if I've got 15 minutes on this question, I need to finish by 10 o'clock, for example. Yeah, so look at the clock before starting each question. Don't not look at the clock and then you look at the clock 45 minutes later and then you realise you're really far behind. So keep looking at the clock, there will be a clock in the exam room. And here are the timings. So roughly, if it's a 5-mark question, you're about 5 or 6 or 7 minutes. And if it's a 10-mark question, 13 to 15 minutes. If you've got extra time, add on a couple of minutes for each one. Obviously, it sounds obvious, but we want to spend more time on the 10-mark questions than we do on the 5-mark question. That is a lot of the time where the students go wrong, where they spend a lot of time on questions 1, 2 and 3. They only do half of question 4 and they leave out question 5 completely. I would say if you miss out any 10-mark questions in the exam, you're really going to struggle to get a grade 4 or above. Okay, again, exam technique, mark or circle on the exam paper what the question's asking you for. So in this question, if it says read lines 1 to 9 for question 1, I would draw a box around 1 to 9. I know it sounds obvious, however, there will be a couple of people in each group. If it says lines 1 to 9, they'll give me an answer from line 10 or line 11. So sounds obvious, but good exam technique, draw a box around it so you know your answer has to come from within that box. Other examples of good exam technique for the reading exam would be draw a box like I said. I would leave a 1-line gap between each quote and each PE. It's nothing worse for an examiner. They see a whole page and it's one massive paragraph with loads and it's really hard for them to find the quotes. Make it really nice and easy for the examiner. When you do a quote, when you explain it, leave a whole line on your A4 and do another one. I would start a new page for each question as well. Even if for question 1 you've only written a little bit, because it's a bullet point question, start a new page for each question. That means if you've got 5 or 10 minutes at the end of the exam, you can go back to your page, go back to question 2, for example, and add 2 or 3 more quotes. And remember, put quotation marks around every quote. If you've taken it from the text, we want to show the examiner that you've taken it from the text. So put a speech mark again, so it makes it really obvious what is a quote. Remember, any point that you make, even on question 5, for some reason on question 5 people think you don't need to use quotes. On any question, you give an answer, give me a quote to back it up. Probably not question 1, but 2, 3, 4 and 5. Give me a quote and back it up. Okay, so question 1, okay, is the simple question really. It's 5 marks, 4 or 5 minutes, and it's a bullet point question. Try to write a little sentence, don't just put 1 word. So for example, you'd get a question like this and it says, 9 lines. You read the extract and it said, read lines 1 to 9, list 5 things, 5 reasons why Obed went to South Africa. And if you read the text, there's probably 5 or 6 or 7 things that you can write down. So for example, he left because things were bad in the past. He left for work. He left because his father said he should go, and so on. Okay, so then you would just turn it to 5 bullet points. I would start each sentence with the name of the person or he. So he left for work. Obed's father said he should go. Obviously, if it's about a girl, she, and then the character's name. Okay, that is it with question 1. It is meant to be like a nice little intro into the exam. It's only worth 5 marks. So if you find 3 or 4 out of the 5 and you can't find the other one, if after 5 minutes you can't find your 5th bullet point, then just leave it. It's only 1 mark. It's not that huge a deal. But if you leave the page, you can go back at the end and see if you can. If you've got 1 minute left, you can use that minute to try and find that extra mark. Okay, question 2 will always be worth 5 marks in the reading exam, but it would be a how question or an impressions question. Normally it's an impression question, so for this video I'll say it is. So there'll be 1 impressions question. It could be on questions 2, 3 or 4, and it'll be worth 5 or 10 marks. To be honest, if it's worth 10 marks, that's probably good to you, because I think the impressions question is probably the easiest question on the exam. So remember, impressions means the kind of view you have of a place or person when you read what is said about them. So an example question could be, what does Megan think of London? Okay, and then what impressions does Megan get of London? And then you would go through the exam paper, find 3 or 4 opinions she has about London, and see how many quotes you can use to back it up. Okay, so structuring your answer in this question, give a quote and say what impression you get. Try and do 5 or 6 quotes. Don't write long PEs. Remember, if the quote is obvious, you don't always need to explain it. So for example, in one of the exam papers, it said, what does Megan think of London? And it literally says, Megan was disappointed with London. So for that one, you could just say, I think Megan is disappointed with London, put disappointed in quotes. You don't need to bother saying this suggests or anything like that. If it's really obvious, remember, just put the quote in. Yeah, so for example, I think Megan thought London was disappointing. We then don't have to do, the writer is saying this because blah, blah, blah. We don't need that because it's a really obvious one. Okay, so remember, if it's a 5 mark question, 3 to 5 quote, and you've got 5 or 6 minutes. If it's a 10 mark question, you've got 13 minutes to 15 minutes. And if possible, you could do 5 to 10 quotes, 5 if you can get. If you can get to 5, anything over 5 will be really good. However, remember, pick as many 1 or 2 word quotes, so we don't want massive sentences, as you can in 6 minutes for a 5 mark question or 15 minutes for a 10 mark question. So in an amazing world, you would do 5 quotes and 10 quotes. However, the main thing is to get over to you is just how many quotes you can do in 5 minutes for a 5 mark question and 15 minutes for a 10 mark question. If after 5 minutes on a 5 mark question you've only got 1 quote, it doesn't matter. If you've got 5 quotes, it doesn't matter. You move on to the next question. You've got to finish the exam. Once your time is up on a question, move on. You must finish the exam. So it doesn't matter if you've got 1 quote or 10 quotes. When your 15 minutes is up on a 10 mark question, you move on to the next question. So an example of impressions. If the sentence said, they whispered as my cheeks went red, what impression would we get of the people who are whispering? Well, we might think they were secretive, as it says they whispered. Yeah, if someone's whispered, they're probably secretive. So one impression I get of the couple is they're secretive, as it says they whispered. That would get you 1 mark in the exam. Okay, again, my cheeks went red. What impression did you get of the person? Yeah, okay, well, one impression I get is they're embarrassed, as the cheeks went red. So give me an impression and give me a quote to back it up. Remember, if you've got an impression, say, and it says embarrassed, like this one, and you had 3 or 4 quotes that says it's embarrassed, shove them all in there. We love quotes. Okay, another one, this man. What impression do you get of this man? Well, if it says he beat his hands on the table, one impression I get of the man is he's angry, as it says beat his hands on the table. Okay, this quote was shrieked. So what impression does the word shrieked give me of the woman? Well, shriek gives me an impression that the girl is scared. So nice and simple. You don't have to do 4 or 5 sentence PEs. Look at this one. It's 1 sentence. It's picked a word and say why it's been used. Okay, another one. Question would be, what impression did you get of the man in this quote? And the quote is, he strutted along the street while looking at his reflection in the shop window. So pause the video and have a think to yourself, what impressions do you get of the man with the word strutted and the phrase looking at his reflection? Okay, example answer would be, one impression I get of the man is he's confident, as Drake is walking here, walking in a confident way. That's what the word strutted means. And I think he seems vain when he says he was looking at his reflection in the shop window. If you saw a man walking down Bournemouth, looking at all the shop windows, looking at his hair, looking at his clothes, you might come to the impression that he's vain. Okay, moving on to how questions. Okay, so there will be 2 how questions in the exam, although question 5 is basically a how question as well. They can be questions 2, 3 or 4. So it'll be 2 of them and they're worth 5 or 10 marks. The head of the exam board says, and this is for all of the exam, the head of the exam board says, plenty of quotes gives a student high marks. And the main thing to get over to you, if you're watching this video, the main thing to do in your exam is get lots and lots of quotes in. Okay, obviously you can't literally just copy the quote out, but if you're struggling for time, don't bother explaining it, just put the quote into a sentence. So why do we want quotes? Well, the examiner just said we want them to get a high mark. These two students here were both just as good as English as each other, both really good, both hoping to achieve and get high marks. However, the person on the left hadn't really got into their head that we need lots of quotes. They only did 3 quotes, and because of that, they only got about 3 marks out of 10. But the person on the right realised if I put loads of quotes in, this put 10 quotes, they got 10 out of 10. So have in your head a quote a mark. If you put a good quote in and put a sensible explanation in, you'll basically get a tick. So in your head, just remember, quotes, quotes, quotes. Okay, same as the last question. So I've already shown you this, but just remember, even though I've said to you it's 5 minutes or 13 minutes for a 10-mark question, even though I've said to you it's 5 or 10 quotes, it's really as many quotes as you can do. So for a 5-mark question at the top of the screen here, after 5 minutes, it doesn't matter if you've done 1 quote or 5 quote, you move on. For a 10-mark question, it doesn't matter after 13 minutes if you've done 1 quote or 8 quotes, you move on, you get through to the end of the exam. Example question, how does the writer present the weather with the quote, the rain crashed against the window? Okay, so it could have said, the writer could have said, for example, the rain tapped against the window. If it would have said that, we would be maybe thinking the rain is soft and unthreatening, but it says crash. So when we think of the word crash, what do we think of? Well, we think of this, don't we? We think of power, we think of violence, we think of pace. So why is the writer bothered to use that word? So the rain crashing, the water crashing against the lighthouse. The writer could have said the rain hit the window. They've chosen crash for a reason. That is what the how question about is saying. Why has a writer chosen one word over another word? And almost be in that human dictionary where you're saying to yourself, well, why have they used the word crashed? So really simple explanation would be the word crashed makes the storm seem powerful and violent. So there's my quote, and then there is my explanation of why that makes the storm seem scary. Okay. Okay, so remember, any 10-mark question is 13 minutes. As many quotes as you can do in 13 minutes, okay? If the question was, how does the writer make the shark seem powerful and violent, right? That's my question. This is based on the extract Jaws, about a giant shark. How does the writer make the shark seem violent and powerful? Okay, let's say the quote was, okay, so that would be my extract, and what I would do is, I would look through the extract and I would highlight as many quotes as I could that show that the shark is powerful. So a few here, it says, it swallowed the woman's limbs without chewing, stream of blood flushing from the woman, it struck her like a train. So I'd go through my extract and highlight words that make the shark seem violent and powerful. So in this question, find a quote that makes the shark seem violent or powerful. 1 or 2 sentences per quote. No waffle along PE. So if you do a quote and an explanation, it should be 1 or 2 sentences. We want you to do 8 or 9 short explanations as opposed to 2 huge ones. Remember, if you put 2 quotes in, you're not going to get more out of 2 out of 10. Okay, again, the question is, how does the writer make the shark seem violent and powerful? My quote is gigantic. So they could have said the shark was normal size, average size. They decided to say the shark's fin was gigantic. Okay, why have they bothered putting that in there? Well, because if it said the shark's fin was tiny, that's not really scary to the reader. But the fact it's gigantic, like this image down here of a giant, this makes the reader seem, this means the shark seem enormous, powerful, or a killer. Yeah, so this person, this student, has linked the word gigantic to the shark being enormous size. This makes it scarier than a small or average size shark. Okay, another quote. Let's say they called the shark a beast. So they haven't called the shark a fish. They haven't called the shark a shark. They have called the shark a beast. So I've put the text is made dramatic straight away with calling the shark a beast. Again, what words do we link to beast? Maybe monster, maybe scary. Yeah, something like that. Okay, so then I've put, this makes the shark seem huge, dangerous, and like a monster. The writer has chosen to use the word beast to describe the shark. They've done it for a reason. It's not luck. They've chosen to do it because they want the reader to think of the shark as dangerous and like a monster. Okay, so this student gives a quote and explains why makes the right tense. they've linked the word beast to size, violence, and a monster. Beast makes it a lot more violent than if you said the fish followed the woman. Okay, another one. This time it's trembling with fear. Richard is trembling with fear, which shows he's been physically shaken by the shark. So again, they could have just said Richard is scared, but they've put trembling with fear because they want the reader to pitch Richard shaking. Yeah. So again, this student gives a quote and explain why it's frightening. They've linked the word trembling to shaking or being worried. Okay, another question. This is from paper 2, but it's same sort of question. This is about a guy who, a young boy, a teenager, who sailed around the world on his own. He was a record breaker. Okay, so the question is, how does the writer show that Mike's trip or voyage was really tough? It's a 10-mark question, so it's about 13 to 15 minutes. As many quotes as you can do in that time. So you would look at the extract and you'd try to find 7 or 8 quotes that show that his trip was really tough. So one quote could be, the weather was torture for Mike. They could have put the weather was hard for Mike. They've put the word torture. So think to yourself, what does the torture mean? Okay, well I put torture shows the weather made the storm feel like agony and punishing. So in my blue there, agony and punishing are connotations of the word torture. I'm basically saying why the writer has decided to use that word. Okay, another one. Mike experienced monstrous storms. They could have said Mike experienced storms. Again, why have they chosen the adjective monstrous? Again, to portray the storm as big, scary, powerful. So I put, this makes the weather scary and powerful. I'm just going to read them now. It does get very lonely. Okay, this is one where I have given an explanation, but this is another one where I don't think you'd really need to explain it. Remember, if it's really obvious, you don't need to explain it. So you would get a mark for just saying, another way it was tough for Mike, as it says, he gets very lonely, and put very lonely in quotes. I've put that explanation, but you would get a mark for just putting the quote in. He battled 50-foot waves. Again, it could have said he had to deal with 50-foot waves. They put battled for a reason. What do you think of when you think of battle? When you think of war, you think of fight, almost like Mike being a soldier. So I put, this suggests the waves are gigantic, because 50-foot is gigantic. And the battle part, I put, and Mike had to fight against them. The boat went berserk. What does berserk mean? Crazy, erratic, uncontrollable. Why is that tough for Mike on a boat trip on his own? Well, this shows that the boat was unpredictable and crazy for him to control. Okay, remember, if you're running out of time on a 10-mark question, forget about PEs and just pick out quotes. So if you've got to the quote, the quote I've got is, it gets very lonely. Why is that tough? If you've got time, you could put, Mike says he's lonely on the trip. This makes it seem tough as Mike had no one to talk to. However, if you're running out of time, you've got 1 minute left on this question, don't bother doing the PEE. Just say, another way it seems tough is when Mike says he was lonely on the trip. So I've ignored, so what I'm doing is I'm not doing this bit. So I'm taking out my explanation. If I'm running out of time, I'm just going to put the quote in and not explain why it's tough. I'm just giving a quote to show, well, that's another quote that shows it is tough. Okay, last question, question 5. Question 5, it will be a statement. So for example, it will say something like, a student in quotes will say, I think the character is very sympathetic. And then basically you agree with that and try to find 4 or 5 quotes. So it's easier to agree with the question. Look for 4 or 5 quotes that agree with the question, and then you could look for 1 quote where maybe you disagree with the question. Okay, so it's a 10-mark question. Again, 13 minutes. I've put 5 to 6 quotes, so slightly less quotes, but mainly because this is the question that students do the least well on, and it's basically because they run out of time. Okay, so an example question for question 5 would be, the writer encourages the reader to feel sympathy for Obed. To what extent do you agree? So what you would do is you look through the extract and you'd find 5 or 6 quotes that make you feel sorry for Obed, and maybe 1 that makes you feel, I don't know, happy for him, for example. Okay, so I said to you earlier, there's 2 how questions, but question 5 is like it. The way of doing it is make question 5 a how question, rephrase the question. So for example, if the question was, the writer encourages the reader to feel sympathy for Obed, just rephrase that to, how does the writer make us feel sympathy for Obed? Go through the extract and find 5 or 6 quotes that make you feel sorry for him. Really important on this question as well, a lot of students get thrown by, it says read lines 47 to the end. So you need to read lines 47 to the end. However, question 5 most of the time is on the whole extract. So if you read down here, it says you should write about your own impressions of Obed as he is presented here and in the passage as a whole. Okay, so you will get marked down if you just answer questions from lines 47 to the end. You've got to do this question on the whole extract unless it tells you not to. Okay, so again, you look for the extract, 4 or 5 quotes that make you feel sorry for him, and maybe one quote that makes you feel happy for him. Okay, an example would be, this is basically about Obed has basically seen a murder, and then he says, although I got away from the murderers, I would be killed. So a really simple point would be, I feel sorry for Obed when he says I would be killed, meaning he is in fear of his life. Another one, I woke up every morning feeling like I was in a groaning prison. So remember, he's not actually in a prison. He said, I feel like I was in a groaning prison. So I feel sorry for him, as prison suggests he felt trapped and punished and caged in. If you wanted to, you could zoom into the word groaning as well, which suggests that it was miserable and hard for him. Okay, final tips for the reading exam then. Time manage. When your time is up for a question, move on. I'd say that is the most important thing. Okay, 5 marks, 5 to 6 minutes, 10 marks, 13 minutes. Remember, it doesn't matter how many quotes you've done in that time. Once that time is up, you move on to the next question. Keep your eye on the clock throughout the exam. Leave a one-line gap between all PE so it's clear. There's no need to say a word is a verb, noun, or adjective. So you don't get any marks for saying that's a verb, that's an adjective. Just say the word and explain why it's been used. If you run out of time on a 10-mark question, don't do a PE, just put the quote into a sentence. And remember, finish all questions. I really think if you finish all questions, you've got such an amazing chance of passing the exam. Any question, drop me a message on Teams. Hope this was useful for you.